There's that funky slide guitar music that comes in every Monday through Friday, live at 5 on the Evil Hippie Network YouTube. Check us out, subscribe, type in IE Newswire Roy Blecker. You'll see my nice smiling, shining face. You can also get all our archives on those channels. Man, what a day. When we thought World War III, the doomsdayers were all out there, we're all gonna die. Well, as you saw, lead story, we'll get into that in a minute. Donald Trump got a ceasefire. Iran has agreed. It's contingent on opening up the Strait of Hormuz. We'll get all into that here in a second. We'll see how that all shakes out. Democrats, again, for their second straight internal poll, say the top two in June is the most likely outcome. Get into some of the latest polling results. And who is the latest to step into the world of Roy in the top two in June to win? California lawmakers are trying to get $26 million in your money to give it to the trannies again. The eco freaks finally stomped out another brewery, the Budweiser Brewery in Fairfield, California. They said no mas after hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of fines. Like the oil refineries, the beer refineries are saying adios amigos to California. Maybe we'll get into the whole world of Jenny Poo, Jenny Newsom, Gavin's wife, and her complete meltdown, and much, much more. But of course, lead story of the day. Donald J. Trump announced a ceasefire with Iran for 2 weeks. He said the bombing will stop. We had Cargill Island, which is where all their oil comes out of, their military bases where they get their natural gas. Few hours today. Of course, right now, 5 o'clock is when all hell was supposed to break loose. Iran agreed to the ceasefire. There's the Reuters AP report. Live update. Iran says it has accepted a 2-week ceasefire in the war. That should mean the Strait of Hormuz is or should be relatively soon being opened, as we say. Iran's Supreme National Security Council says it has accepted a 2-week ceasefire in the war, a statement that it would negotiate with the United States in Islamabad beginning Friday. It has emphasized this does not signify the termination of the war. The statement said our hands remained on the trigger and we should, the slightest error be committed by the enemy, it shall be met with full force. So the contingent was the ceasefire was the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. No penalties, no threats, no charges, no tariffs, no nothing. So we'll see if that goes through. Oil prices, who earlier in the day hit a record $115 a barrel in day trading, well, record that we ain't seen in years, dropped immediately to below 95, dropped immediately 20 bucks a barrel, down to 94 and change on that, just on the news of the ceasefire. Stock market futures went sky high through the roof. We need to get this done. We need to get the Strait of Hormuz. And I've said that. I said that in the beginning. There better be a plan to get the Strait of Hormuz open, not just for 2 weeks, for into perpetuity, no threats, no nothing. Anybody that tries to run tariffs or tries to do any military attacks or mines or interlays anything else in there is going to be blown off the frickin' face of the earth. That should be the final agreement coming out of there. I don't care if it's Iran, Iraq, and United Arab Emirates, or whomever. Anybody that tries to hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage will immediately be hit with such devastating force across their country until they stop the ish. Period. Frickin' end of story. I think we're in a situation like, and I really think there's, well, at least in my lifetime, there's only been two presidents who've had this. One was Ronald Reagan and Trump. The reason we are not speaking Russian today, and Russia's the USSR is not running things, is in 1980, Reagan said no. And remember when he had that little radio, when he used to do his weekly radio address, and before he come on, he said, yeah, in 10 minutes the bombing starts. The Russians were 90% sure that Reagan wouldn't do it, but they always thought, you know, the crazy old man, there's 10% chance he might pull it off. That's why when Schultz and Colin Powell and all those clowns were saying, oh, you got to sign the SALT II treaty and we got to surrender our weapons, and Reagan picked up and said no, got on Air Force One, and they all headed back. And 2 years later, the Soviet Union, as we know it, collapsed. As Reagan said, without firing a shot. So we got to that point, and they even said the reason we did is because, you know, we always had in our back of our mind the crazy old man might do it. Trump's got the same thing. They're probably 90% sure he wouldn't obliterate Iran, but there's also that 10% chance he might. And I think that's why you see the ceasefire, hopefully the Strait of Hormuz opening, and we can all go back to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and all will be well in the world. Get into this and more on the rest of today's show, but no bombing will be starting as was threatened by Trump. So we'll see how this next 2 weeks goes. Hopefully all the negotiations get ironed out, and we'll see the big press conference and the big hoorah. And again, we can all go back to business as usual. Hopefully that's the case. This thing's probably gone on far too long, as they say. But we're at the point of we need to 100% stop. Get out of this thing. And again, with the deal, with the proviso, anybody else pulls any crap in the Strait of Hormuz or any of that waterway in there is done. We're not even gonna negotiate. We're not even gonna say anything. Like Reagan said, the bombing starts in 10 minutes. And everybody around has a clear understanding that this is what's going to happen. Hopefully they'll get all this stuff worked out. We can get oil prices and gas prices back down to where they should be. None too soon. It's going to be interesting to see if there's any more bumps in the road. I think by this time Iran's probably had enough. You know, they've had their head pounded in the ground enough times. They're ready to say no mas. Of course, they tried to roll up to this point. You know, they tried to play it right up to the end, which is not necessarily a bad strategy, but when they got hit in Cargyle Island today, even a little bit ahead of what Trump's schedule was, I think they said, we know what, the jig is up. we better start negotiating before we're completely obliterated off the map. So hopefully cooler heads prevailed. We won't have to worry as much about this whole ridiculous piece that we've had. Hopefully we're seeing the downhill slide. Trump said 2 to 3 weeks more last week. Well, the end of this 2 weeks will be that. Hopefully that's announced and troops are pulling out. Strait of Hormuz is open. Everything is returning back to normal. And it cannot happen a minute too soon. Some of the eco freaks. Will Swain from California Policy Center put this up. If Budweiser needed confirmation of its decision to close its Fairfield, California brewery, Air Quality District fines Fairfield Budweiser Brewery $2.3 million over alleged emissions violations. This is the same thing that got them out, that got their oil refineries. From 50 just a scant few years ago to 7, going on 5, going on to 3, 2, 1, 0. The bad news is if we don't turn this around, we're not going to have any jobs. We're not even going to have factory jobs. We're not going to have warehousing jobs. We're not going to have any jobs. All because these fruitcake, eco-freaks, tree-hugging nutcases we have allowed to take control of our government. In the People's Republic of California. When do we get enough chops to stop this? I mean, vaya caramba. On top of that, this stuff comes up. California lawmakers consider $26 million to fund transgender care to make up for the Trump cuts. We have elected a legislature that's completely out of its mind. There could be no other excuse for this. Further, you see in the California Post, piece by Titus View, or something or other. Can we get back to Smith and Johnson and Jones? Gosh, you gotta confuse poor old 6th grade educated disc Spank Okie from Edgemont all the time. The stuff. Anyway. Advocacy groups are demanding California lawmakers cough up $26 million in funds for access to gender-affirming care, despite concerns about multi-billion-dollar state budget deficits. Have they looked at the Supreme Court lately? 8 to 1. They're dumping this up. The only one you got up there is Ketanji Jackson Brown, the metal midget. In a packed committee hearing Monday, State House Democrats explored further ways to fight off what they described as a significant threat to care access for transgender Californians from the Trump administration. Look, let's pick an age. Whatever adult, right now mostly is considered in California over 18. You're over 18. You want to cut this off, sew this on, or whatever the process is. I'm fine with that as long as you're paying for it. I don't want to pay for that. I should not pay for that. There's no logic anywhere that I or anyone else in California should pay for any of these procedures. You didn't break your arm falling out of a tree. You didn't get in a car accident. They didn't give you the bad news. You got lung cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer. This is a choice. I don't know, we probably do. But I mean, this to me is the equivalent of paying for a boob job. Should I pay 5 or 10 grand for somebody else's chick to have a bigger set of boobs? This is about how absurd this is. This is a choice. Now, if you got 5 grand or 10 grand and you want to play the Byron Gnome deal and whatever, hey, then go for it. But this forced paying of lifestyle choices has got to stop. Quit calling it gender affirming and all that. It's a choice. It's a cosmetic surgery. So, if you're an adult, if you want to pay for it, these things cost $300,000, $500,000 to do. That's, Granny, you complain about, no hospital this, no Medicare. Well, this is why. People that actually need medical services are not getting them because we're doing stupid. Why is it that we cannot knock off stupid? Sometimes I think we're just foobarred. I try not to think of that, but, some of the recent events, well, like today, maybe we're getting, this whole Iran thing is getting solved. And, history's going to find out if it was a good deal or bad, and Trump and everybody will be judged on whatever was, whatever has happened up to this point. And hopefully the deal is. And I think it will probably be a net plus if we get back to there's no threat on the Strait of Hormuz or that whole waterway. Goods and services, fertilizer, oil and gas is going to flow through there for everybody. And, hey, we can get back to some semblance of normality here. Let the free market work. If that comes out of it, and, if there was weapons mass destruction, or they were going to get a nuclear bomb or all that other stuff, if that's wiped out or severely curtailed, okay, let's move on. We're not in this thing for 20 years or 2 years or whatever. But again, we'll figure that out. We'll get into some of the election stuff and some of the more issues in California. But hey, We're all 8 billion of us are still here on planet Earth. What a joy. We don't, we don't have to worry about planet extinction that was predicted a half hour ago.
30 seconds, Roy.
As Sean said, we'll be joining the Mighty Met 1490 AM. Here on that, we'll get into some of the California election stuff that's going on. Maybe we'll touch on the Jenny Poo stuff a little bit. And much, much more on today's exciting show that we're all still breathing in.
Here we go, 10 seconds.
Roll with the best hillbilly hoedown around.
IE Newswire Daily is on the air.
The following is a paid program. Views and claims expressed are those of the program producer and are not endorsed by this station. Opinions expressed are not necessarily those of radio station KMET, its management, employees, or affiliates.
There's that funky slide guitar music that comes in every Monday through Friday, live at 5:30 on the Mighty Met 1490 AM, broadcasting all over the Inland Empire and the aforementioned AM band, joining your vast video audience on the Evil FB Network YouTube. Check us out, subscribe, type in IE Newswire, Roy Bleckert. You'll see my nice, smiling, shining face. You'll get the archives. You can check out our first half hour of the show. Of that, with all the great information, voila, we're all still here. No World War III, no nuclear obliteration of Iran or anything else. What a big turn of events. It was just announced, about an hour and a half ago or so, the news was breaking that a ceasefire was called. Donald Trump announced it. Iran agreed to it. Part of the agreement for the next 2 weeks while they finish up negotiations is the Strait of Hormuz is supposed to be open. No threats, no charges, no tariffs, no nothing. Trump said, if you open up the Strait of Hormuz, we will do a ceasefire, and then we will give you 2 weeks to come to a full and complete agreement that none of this issue is going to happen again, and so we will see how far that goes. But for right now, if it has not been, it should be opening very soon, the Strait of Hormuz. Oil peaked earlier in the day at 115, anticipating the Trump obliteration of Iran, which he said, which didn't happen. And immediately, as soon as the ceasefire was announced, oil futures dropped plus 20 to below $95. The futures market on the stocks went through the roof. So everybody is breathing, or most everybody is breathing, a big sigh of relief on that. Hopefully we get these negotiations out. And what I said at the first of this, the deal's got to be the Strait of Hormuz is not under any threat, no military threat, no nothing. The free market reigns, the commerce goes through, the oil, the fertilizer, natural gas, and everything else comes through. And in my world, at the end of this 2 weeks, all of them, United Arab Emirates, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Israel, all of them in there are going to sign an agreement. If anybody screws with that whole waterway or lays a bomb or tries to do a tariff, we aren't even saying anything. We're going to do like Reagan did in the radio address. The bombing starts in 10 minutes. And we're just going to obliterate your country. We're not going to go through this stuff again. We're not playing. You violate it, you're done. You're signing that agreement. And then hopefully, we don't have to worry about this. And if something does happen, we will fix it very fast. See how easy that is? We'll see what shakes out in the next 2 months. But hopefully everything gets ironed out. You got to give Trump credit. I mean, for all the nattering nabobs of negativism. And, I wasn't necessarily red hot about this, but I said if it winds up being that we get a solution to Iran not playing any games across the Strait of Hormuz or that whole waterway, and we got it, then I can make a justification for doing what was done. So we'll see how this all shakes out in the next 2 weeks. Hopefully, there's one of those big hoo-ha press conferences where everybody would tell us how great they are, and we can all get back to business as usual. The other thing, well, yesterday, of course, Sunday, and we covered it yesterday, the big announcement, Trump endorsed Steve Hilton, all that good stuff. And everybody had their instant analysis, and I said, hey, wait till we see, give it a couple weeks, it'll take that to see how it shakes out. But I do, actually, there is a path where this may even strengthen the top two. So remember last week we had the Democratic Party's internal poll, California Democrats, their organization, their party, state party, California organization, came up with a poll. Steve Hilton and Chad were on top. Steyer, Porter, and Eric Swalwell were all tied at 10%. The other three were tied at 3%, and then the bottom feeders were 2 and 1. And this is just before, well, actually the last day of the poll was on the day Trump made the Hilton announcement. So this is the last poll before the Trump announcement. And these are the numbers that came out. Chad Bianco gained 2 points and actually has a slight lead now on Steve Hilton. Steve Hilton is still at 14% where he was last week. So it's Chad and Steve. Eric Swalwell bumped 2 up to 12. Tom Steyer bumped 1 up to 11. The psycho chick Katie Porter down 3 down to 7. Javier Baccaria Mahan and Tony Villar, Antonio Villaraigosa, as most of you know him, all gained 1% from 3 to 4%. Betty Yee stayed at 1. Tony Thurman was a big loser. He went from 2 to 0. So really not much change. So this will be, Democrats are doing this poll to see where they're at. They're trying to figure out, they got the icky 8 problem, and they're trying to figure out how do we beat Steve and Chad? Because if they get in the top 2, we're locked out in November. So it's going to be interesting. I suspect Hilton will get a slight bump out of this. Maybe, depending on, there's a couple different, 2 or 3 different off-ramps can be taken. Chad might even pick up some support over the Trump endorsement of Hilton. Then we have the Eric Swalwell case, and we have was he playing with the interns? Like Cheyenne Hunt said, from California, very liberal attorney, says, I've got a bunch of clients, we're coming out and exposing this. Now, Swalwell in a Politico piece denied it, said he never signed or never asked any of his interns to sign non-disclosure agreements. It's all a bunch of hogwash. Well, Cheyenne Hunt's not part of the vast right-wing conspiracy. In fact, like 180 degrees opposite. They're trying to say, oh, it's a Trump dude. I don't think Cheyenne Hunt has probably ever said one decent word about Trump. So that really doesn't wash, but he's denying all the whole allegations that are coming out. So he only got a 2-point bump from the Teachers Union SEIU endorsement, which was the big thing. Steyer, 1-point bump from close to $100 million he spent so far. You can't hardly turn on a radio or TV without hearing a Tom Steyer ad. Katie Porter was a big loser in all this 3 points, and you could say that all went to, that was evenly distributed between Becerra, Matt Mahan, and Antonio Villaraigosa. So, not that I'd be discouraging it, but if Betty Yee or Tony Thurmond drops out at this point, I don't think it's going to move the needle much. I don't see, based on what Gray Davis said in his election, winning the Democratic primary and then the governorship in '98 here in California, on the murder-suicide strategy from Gary South, I don't see any of the rest of them pulling out. This poll, 1 week later, still, especially on the Democratic side, shows it's wide open. And if these allegations that Shailene Hunt has been rolling out there are anywhere close on Eric Swalwell, you can take that 12% and start dividing it up all between the others, and that's really going to rocket the race. Swalwell, it appears, did not get a big bump out of the SIEU and teachers union endorsements. And really, there is no clear front runner. In fact, maybe slightly. I mean, it's still at a plus or minus 4. Villaraigosa, Matt Mahan, and Baccaria are all within the margin of error hitting Eric Swalwell, the top Democrat. So there's no incentive for them to pull out, especially with this stuff swirling on the spy Swalwell. So that's some very interesting news. And it looks like they're going to do a poll a week. You know, they're doing the poll. They're probably doing the poll now for that will come out. For this week, that will probably come out next Monday or Tuesday. And it'll be interesting to see. I'm really banking a lot on this poll because this is the Democratic Party of the state of California is putting it out. And really for this, they have no incentive per se to cook the numbers. And it looks like looking at the crosstabs are not really doing it. They're not trying to favor one candidate over another. They're just trying to get a read on it. And the read is really no more clearer than it was that. They have 6 candidates, all within the margin of error of being the top Democratic vote getter, and they're still not cracking the top 2, which is if they don't do that, it's all for naught. Another one is a poll by Create Strategies on the Attorney General. Rob Bonta only at 40%. Michael Gates, former Huntington Beach city attorney, and Trump DOJ official, is now at 27%. Other 10, not sure, 24. In fact, that not sure 24 is exactly the same in the governor's race. You know, and you get the Cal generic ballot, Democrat, GOP, 48-33, which is pretty consistent with the 40-60 split we've had in our voting for about 20 years in California. The big thing is Newsom's job approval. Only 39% approving, 50% disapproving. Underwater. Majority disapproving of Gavin Newsom as president. As governor. He thinks he's going to be president. Not saying that he won't. Never say never. But that's a very interesting read. Bonta being the incumbent, they've been getting a consistent 60% of the vote. Him only at 40% going into this, and this is a race that doesn't have 87 million. Is pretty much going to be, I don't see the scenario where it isn't going to be Rob Bonta and Michael Gates moving to the other, but that still gives you Michael Gates has a path to victory, which probably isn't. We've had at the Attorney General since 2010, when the first pretty much obvious voter fraud deal was, where they shoved Kamala Harris over the line over Steve Cooley, the former LA County DA. So there's going to be a lot of interesting plays in this. Carl DeMott, he's pretty much the only Republican assemblyman, state or Senate, he's the loudest voice that we have holding up life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Center right, freedom, and liberty. We've been having some interesting conversations, some online in the social media networks, and some not. He's been saying all this time, we've got to get behind one candidate. And of course, you know me, I've been steadfastly, it's top two in June. And we've been locked in this battle, or battle of political strategy, really hard since the first of the year. Because Carl's got a big following with Reform California. We got, he got the voter ID law, which should be on the ballot in November. Helped Howard Jarvis get the Say Prop 13. Hopefully that'll be on the ballot of that. But I was pleasantly surprised, as they say, to hear Carl DeMaio come up and say this.
One of them to a Democrat any day of the week. We also have half of our supporters at Reform California who like Bianco and half that like Steve Hilton. We did an informal survey of our supporters, and that's what the survey results showed, about 50-50, split right down the middle. At Reform California, we, for the moment, are going to stay neutral in the governor's race. Obviously, we're going to give you updates on what happens in the governor's race. We're covering both of these candidates quite fairly.
So this is after Sunday's Trump announcement that he's backing Steve Hilton. And Carl DeMaio was one, that's why he was doing the polls and the surveys, and we're going to have to get behind one candidate, and top two in June is a fallacy, never happened, yada, yada, yada. Well, that's almost shifting gears 111%. And he's been what I've been telling people. The ones who, even with Trump's endorsement, I don't see people who are backing the base of support that Chad Bianco has. I don't see them moving to Steve Hilton. If Trump would have endorsed Chad Bianco, I don't see the Steve Hilton core base moving or going to Chad Bianco. Now, again, we'll see what happens in the next 2 weeks. But Carl DeMaio and a lot of others I've been talking to have seen the same thing. And I think that's why Carl's saying, hey, we can't, if we endorse one or the other, we're going to piss off half of our constituency, which is what I've been trying to tell them. And those that are pushing we got to get behind Steve Hilton. And, whatever. I've said, hey, I'm not arguing the point if you're on that team. The big thing is the 24% undecided. That's where, and we're right. Most of the polling coming out right now, we're right in, Steve and Chad are splitting the vote like evenly. Whatever 40% or whatever it is of center right, freedom, liberty type vote we have in California. So it looks like, and I welcome Carl DeMaio on the bandwagon, top two in June. And that's what we got to do. We got to figure out, if people start jumping on, if the lower informed voters start jumping a little bit more in the Trump bandwagon, we need to get the higher informed voters to jump on this Chad bandwagon. So we even this thing out. Because the rats are doing their part. They've got the icky eight scrambled all over the place. And we need to keep the chaos going. We need to encourage them John Cobell, the KFI, is having Villaragos on. They had him on earlier. I think John Phillips on KABC had Villar on. We need to pump these other guys up, because the ones that are not voting on our side, we need to encourage them to scatter all over those icky eight, no matter who it is. Steyer, Baccaria, Mahan, whatever. The Psycho Chick Porter. We need to keep them scrambling. We need to shake up the red ants and the black ants in the jar on the Democratic side, just like they do to us. Turnabout is fair play in politics, as they say. But the strategy play is working out. And again, of the stuff. That's why I wasn't panicked when Trump came out and endorsed Steve Hilton. I was even more surprised Trump even rolled in on the California elections, because in most cases, since 2015, he has pretty much stayed out of the California elections, and it appeared he was going to do that today. But and again, it could be a benefit of evening out the late deciders. So we got about a quarter of the vote with 30 days or less than 30 days before ballot voting starts. We still got a quarter of the vote that's undecided. You have no standout, even with Chad or Steve or the Icky Eight. The bottom line is you have no standout candidate. You don't have anybody of the stature, even of Arnold. Anybody that knows me has heard, I have almost absolutely no use for Arnold as his term for governor. The first part of it was maybe the first year was pretty decent, and then it just went off the rails. But there's no stature candidate, Ronald Reagan, Moonbeam, Pat Brown, that galvanize the people. And we've had a whole run since Arnold of Republican candidates that just sucked. I mean, from eBay Mag in 2010, which was less conservative, less freedom and liberty than Jerry Brown. Like the Congressman, time Assembly Member Senator Tom McClintock said, it was very easy to see who was going to win between Moonbeam Brown and Meg Whitman, because Jerry Brown was the more conservative candidate. You just have to take the gun issue, Second Amendment. Brown gets like a C rate. He's not bad. He's not great. He's not bad on Second Amendment. Meg Whitman got an F from the NRA. And the whole list goes on. Meg Whitman would have been a worse disaster as governor than Moonbeam Brown. And that's a pretty low bar to try to crawl under. And, we got the Cox and the whole thing, and the Brian Dolly, all of them. We just have not had any gravitas capture the imagination, get everybody on board, like an Arnold, like a Moonbeam, like a Donald Trump, like a Barack Obama, or whatever, that could galvanize and capture that imagination that just Ronald Reagan, that just drawed people in. I mean, that's why Gavin Newsom won. And and we all know what I think of Gay Boy Gavin. But, he has that. He has the looks and the star power and and even, as I say, the crazy hand gestures for some reason. The girlies just eat that stuff up. And, that's why I say, comparatively, I think if he gets in the big leagues, like with the Ron DeSantis debate, because he's never been challenged per se, but, he has that appeal, that, he's photogenic, let's put it that way. And that's, part of the game. That's part of what makes politics fly. So hopefully, that's why I say, especially this race, like I said, I couldn't have drawn the scenario up any better. We have our best shot in 20 years to get a center-right, freedom and liberty type elected governor here in California. We got less than 60 days to do it, so it's got to be all hands on deck. Got to play the strategy smart. I'm not arguing with my friends. I got both sides. I'm very strong Bianco Hilton supporters. I'm saying, hey, that's fine. We just got to work on those that are just like on the fence, low propensity voters, they're last minute, whatever. Figure out which one needs the vote and kind of shift it that way. And then on to June 2nd and get the count in, and we'll see if we can pull off the Hail Mary pass. Heading to the Moreno Valley City Council, where this ought to be an S show. We'll maybe report on that tomorrow, but hey, my native area, what can I say? We have a reputation to keep up. That's about all I can come up with. That'll do it for today. As we usually say at this time, mandatory, you're back here in 23 hours. Why? You're the best darn show in the whole wide world. Till then, see ya.
The proceeding was a...
Well, have fun tonight, Roy.
Oh, it should be. Should be a wild one.
Well, give them all a lot of hell.
We will.
Bye now.